founding a company is such a lonely journey, and actually finding people around you who have great visions and have similar problems is just so magical to so many of our founders.
Hello and welcome to Random VC, a podcast where we discuss startups, innovation, and venture capital. I want to thank our sponsors, Scribe Equity and the Nudge Group. I'm your host, Maria Halasz. If you like what you hear, please follow us on your favorite podcast channel or go to our YouTube channel when there's more content. My guest today is Michael Batko, CEO of Startmate. Welcome, Michael.
Excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, I was really excited to have you, Michael, actually, because, and not just because you're the CEO of Startmate and you've just started a new cohort, of course,
yes,
and I'm going to ask you a few questions about that, but also because we met at Startup Striders.
That's right.
And that's a running group you've started, and I'm a passionate runner, if anything. And obviously you are one too. Are you?
Yes, absolutely.
So you started, and I was in awe how you could get a bunch of 20 and 30-somethings up at the dawn of Saturday by 7 o'clock to go running with the parkrun guys and Centennial Park. So well done on that one.
No, thanks so much.
Not only that, but you managed to get me online as well. And that's not easy. So in addition to Startmate, you also have your own little micro-learning platform, Puddle Pod. So I'm going to ask you about that too. But before we launch into all this, I actually wanted to talk to you about your background a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
So tell me, how did you end up in Sydney? What was your journey like? Your family. How did you decide to come here?
Oh yeah. So I was born in Austria, in Vienna, to Polish parents, and I. When I finished school, I really wanted to study in English. And so the options to me were the US, which was too expensive, Australia, which was too far, and the UK. So I essentially ended up moving to the UK and did economics and management, actually, a very, very classic degree. Lots of my friends went into consulting. I did my master's in international management as well. And that was actually where my story to Australia starts, or like to Sydney, because in my master's, when I was in Sweden, I'll actually give you a long story.
Give me the long story, Michael.
The way my journey to Australia really started was that I, on my first day in university in Sweden, went into my room in a student accommodation. I sat down on my bed, and I didn't even unpack because I was so tired. I started watching a movie, and as I was watching the movie, everything started itching, and I turned on the lights, and there was just bedbugs everywhere.
Oh God!
And that was obviously the prompt for me to move out of that room. Everything got actually frozen, because that's how you kill bedbugs. So I literally had to put my suitcase into the freezer. But as serendipity has it, I was moved to the room next to my now wife. So we met obviously back then, and we shared a kitchen. We were in the bedrooms right next to each other. We started dating in Sweden, and she was Australian. She's from Newcastle.
Wow.
And we decided to go into a long-distance relationship. And another serendipitous moment, actually, was that I've got an Austrian and a Polish passport. And back then, this is in 2014, Poland just released a second set of completely new work and travel visas to Australia, which was impossible for Austrians to do, but was finally possible for Polish people to do. So I was the first person who bolted to Poland, sat in the car for 7-8 hours to renew my passport to get the visa. And that's why I moved to Australia.
Well, that's an amazing story. And it's amazing how those little things in life, those like bed bugs, change the course of your fate. I think that's an amazing story. So, okay, so you're in Australia and your wife was already here, or she was traveling with you?
Yeah, so my wife was already here. I moved here on a work and travel visa. I was like, I'm going on the other side of the world. I had nobody, only my at the time girlfriend, and all I know about Australia is kangaroos and surfing. So obviously, the first thing I was trying was surfing, but I also really needed a job, and again, like to the moments, to the serendipitous moments throughout my life, the way I got my first job in Australia was I posted on a Facebook group, and I posted on an alumni Facebook group, hey, who's got a job for me? Part-time, full-time, anything. There's like, I just need some kind of work. And as part of the Facebook post, a couple of people tagged other people, and a friend of a friend of a friend essentially messaged me and said, hey, I don't have a job for you, but do you want to play soccer the next week? And I rocked up, played soccer. And after the game, he was like, hey, you're actually pretty good. Why don't you come back next week again? And played 2 or 3 times. And at which stage he was saying that he had somebody leaving on a parental leave, whether I wanted to fill in for the person at a company called Mad Paws. And that was actually my first startup job ever, which was now 10, 11 years ago, for a marketplace for pet sitters. So again, like the serendipitous moments of actually just playing soccer and just continuing the trend landed me my first startup job, and I never looked back.
Well, this reminds me of all the serendipitous moments of my life. And, obviously I'm Hungarian and I came from Hungary, but how I got here was on the back of a book. In that when I was 5, I was given a book about Australia and Oceania, and I only knew about kangaroos and koalas also. And then I got the opportunity to migrate, and of course the obvious choice was Australia. So those little moments in life that turn your faith are amazing.
Incredible, yeah.
So you mentioned that you ended up working for a startup initially. It's really interesting because you studied economics, did you?
Yeah.
How was it shifting your mindset from really macro issues to going into a startup and being really at the very beginning of a company?
Yeah, great question there. Like my first ever job was actually at American Express, and the reason why I started that one was because I was like, everybody needs a bit of finance, and it's always good to learn P&Ls and balance sheets. And my next jobs actually were all in consulting. So to your point of like macroeconomic issues, it was very much like you fly in, fly out, give a bit of advice. There was a PwC and KPMG, and that was really fun to meet lots of people and work on those high level kind of topics. But then what always frustrated me with consulting, or like with the high level topics, is that I felt like you were talking a lot but not doing a lot. As in, like, you actually didn't get to implement what you were saying. You weren't actually making the direct impact on customers. So this is when I then got my first job in a startup with Mad Paws. I mean, for context, it was literally 3 of us at the time. It was like the founder, myself, and an intern. And what I loved about it was that every single day I would be making an impact on people. Whether there was somebody really needed a dog sitter because they were going on a holiday, it was a marketplace for pet sitters. Or somebody was taking care of a dog and the dog ran away, or whatever it was. Like, I was always problem solving, and I knew that whatever I was doing every single day actually made an impact on somebody's lives.
Well, that's incredible, actually. But how did you end up from Mad Paws to at Startmate?
Yeah.
Because you've been there since 2019, so you've got like a good 5 years, or maybe even earlier.
Yeah. So yeah, with Mad Paws, I absolutely loved it. But I then got approached by a company called Expert 360, which is a marketplace for consultants, and there was a pretty easy choice because dogs or cats, I love them, but it's also not my life's mission. I couldn't imagine myself working in that space for the rest of my life.
Do you have a dog or a cat?
I don't, no. Again, like, I love them, but it's like not what I want to dedicate my life to. And at Expert 60 was the perfect mix of kind of marketplace experience, which I had, and consulting experience, which I had, which was a good fit there. I started when there was 7 or 8 people. We raised $14 million from Airtree. But I then realized that what I loved was having oversight of so many things. I loved working product, marketing, engineering, like everything. Whereas once the team scaled to 60 or 70 people at Expert 60, my job became more and more narrow. And which then led me to quitting my job and going around the world, finding myself a little bit and asking myself, what do I actually want to do in life? And my answer to that was, I want to help 50 companies every year to grow. Rather than just one startup, I would love to work with many of them. And the answers essentially were venture capital. But then you also just mostly give money, but you don't necessarily sit with the founder every single day, or accelerators. So my answer was the accelerators themselves. And I've got a couple of stories here which we can touch on as well, but that was essentially my pathway into Startmate. And it led me back into startups, but actually being able to spread myself across 50 companies every year rather than just one.
So you said you've got a couple of stories around that.
Yeah.
Tell me one.
Yeah, for sure. So probably like this is something that I actually tell our student fellows all the time. We've got a student fellowship at Startmate where we help 500 students into startup jobs every single year. And I feel like so many people often go into like, oh, I need to find a role and I need to apply on a website. I need to write a cover letter. I'm not even going to adjust the cover letter. My CV is going to look exactly the same. But nobody's ever willing to go the extra mile to actually show that you really want the job, that you've done your research. So my story essentially is the one of I was traveling around the world. I knew I wanted to work in a startup accelerator, but I didn't care actually where I was going to work. So I fired up a spreadsheet with input on every accelerator around the world. There was literally like 200 accelerators in there. At the time, there was less than there is now. And I then cold outreach to every single one of them. Like it was literally like the hello at email address kind of thing, or like the random telephone number that was on there. And I just had this spreadsheet, and I still have it when I was marking. I like reached out, ghosted me, didn't reply, or actually replied. And honestly, out of like 200 companies, like 150 never even replied, even after 2 or 3 follow-ups. 50 of them, like out of the 50 which replied, like 40 of them said, we don't have a job. There's nothing going on here. But then out of the 10 that did reply, I actually got the interviews, and I was interviewing in like Tel Aviv and Singapore and San Francisco. And that's how, instead of actually working somewhere around the world, it actually led me all the way back to Sydney. But the point of the story was just the one of like, you actually need to do the legwork and to go the extra mile. And
Absolutely. Absolutely. Every interaction with you, Michael, has been, in my impression, has been that you do the extra work and go the extra mile. I mean, I remember reaching out about the startup striders, and almost like within 5 minutes, I got the link of where I can join. And then, I arrived there on Saturday morning, everybody's in a circle, and moving around. And, so tell me what happened this Saturday. I missed this Saturday's run while we're talking about startup striders. Did you end up doing the, I don't know how many star jumps or burpees or whatever we agreed on that you're going to do?
Yeah, no, we ended up doing some of them as a group. So everybody took 10 or 20 burpees and we all did them together.
They're too nice, those people. I always say, I go home and talk to my daughter about the kids that I run with, and I said, they're just so nice.
Yeah.
Quite clearly. Let me go back to Startmate a little bit. You've just started a new group. Is
yes,
that right?
Yeah.
And that's your winter accelerator group. Tell me a little bit about the composition and how you selected the companies that are in that Startmate group right now.
Yeah, for sure. So for context, Startmate's been around for 14 years now, and we get about 1,200 applications every year. And we then end up investing in roughly 25 to 30 companies every year. We split that into 2 cohorts, which are the summer and the winter cohorts. And it's a big job. Like every 6 months, we get essentially the 600 applications. And what we do is 3 stages. The first stage is roughly 100 of our mentors who are personally invested in the fund. So they've got real skin in the game. They want to see the best companies go through. They actually go in and they review every single application. Every single application is reviewed by roughly 5 to 10 people. The way we actually do that is a little different as well. What we don't do is necessarily assess exactly like, is this idea the right idea? Because the idea is going to change so often. What we actually look for is spikes. We call them our spikes framework, which is, does the team spike because they're the best team in the world in X area? Or is that invention that they have 10 times better than anything else? Or is the market so incredibly ripe for innovation? So we're looking for spikes. And that's how we filter into the next stage. In the next stage, and where we get roughly 50 to 60 companies in, we then interview them for 10 minutes back to back with roughly 10 mentors. So you actually get to meet a lot of mentors and investors very, very quickly. And then the final stage, which is roughly with 20 to 25 companies, we then dive deeper in for an hour, talk about kind of like the plans for the future. Where does the company see themselves in 10 years' time? What's the plan to get there? Any risks involved? And the whole process actually takes about 4 weeks, at which stage we invest $120,000 into each one of our companies.
And is it a 12-week program that you put the companies through, and what do they learn during that period?
Yeah, totally. So like the program itself is we call it a 12-week program, but it probably is more like 14 or 15 weeks because we cheat a little bit. We before it actually starts, we've got a week 0, and week 0 is actually where we fly all of our founders in together to Melbourne, and they get to know each other on a very personal basis. It gets very deep very quickly, and the founders, literally after day 2, they feel like they've known each other forever because founding a company is such a lonely journey, and actually finding people around you who have great visions and have similar problems is just so so magical to so many of our founders. And then we've got the 12 weeks where we help them on sales, marketing, fundraising. And then we've got a demo day at the end. Demo day is now a huge event of like 1,000 to 1,500 people in Sydney, with like hundreds of investors there, where then most companies actually raise between $1 to $4 million off the back of it. Also, I noticed I didn't answer one of the other questions, which was the composition of the cohort. Yeah. So the composition, I
was going to come back to that.
We love investing across all different thematics. We don't necessarily have a mandate. We always invest in the person themselves and that they are solving the right problem. And then we also know that the solution will keep changing. But what we look for is essentially that person-problem fit, which then means that we invest roughly 60% into software, 40% into startups. In this cohort, actually, there's roughly, I think, 30 or 40% of the companies are in the AI space, which is exciting as well. 40% of our companies are women co-founded, which is also good because there's just not enough venture funding going into women-funded companies. And yeah, we've seen so many trends over the years, and AI is definitely the most recent one.
Yes, I mean, I was going to talk about AI a little bit only because everybody else is talking about it, so I might as well. And I was interested in your view of what kind of AI companies do you have in your current cohort? You said you've got 3 or 4 of those companies. Are these AI first or agents, or what kind of companies were you looking for?
Yeah, for sure. So the interesting thing in AI for me is the speed to start and like the value you can deliver to your customer so much faster than if you were building something from scratch. And that's really like, because otherwise people get hung up on like the technology itself, or can you build large language models, etc., etc. But it's actually like the start, like you can just start so much faster and get into to revenue so much faster to validate whether you're actually solving a problem to a customer. And that is super exciting to me. So maybe one story that I can give you is a company called Lyrebird Health. And actually, let me start with a story before I tell you about the company. But essentially, it was founded by 2 guys called Linus and Kai, who were in the final year of Melbourne Uni and Monash University. And they would have never met outside of they did our student fellowship at Startmate. So in their summer holidays, they essentially came together and said, we're going to do this 2-week boot camp with Startmates to essentially like explore what startups are like. They really liked it. And at the end of the boot camp, we essentially asked them, hey, do you want to essentially like pitch us an idea? And they came together and said, hey, let's pitch an idea together. And they essentially pitched this idea for going to doctors, and instead of the doctors having after an appointment writing everything down that the patient told them, to just record that and transcribe it straight into the system. So we loved the idea and essentially gave them a free spot into our pre-accelerator program called Launch Club. And essentially they went into that one for 10 weeks and they started the company from scratch. They just never had any experience. They're still in the final year of uni, started the company. They got the first 1 or 2 customers on board. We loved their guys so much. We then funded them for the accelerator. So we gave them $120,000. Those were 2 students straight out of uni. And they took the money and got into a position to actually get $100,000 of annual recurring revenue after just another 10 weeks, which then led them to getting funded from the US for a couple of $1 million. And then a year and a half later, since the student fellowship, they already passed $2 million in annual recurring revenue. Like absolutely flying.
What a superstar bunch of people.
So it's like it's amazing what can happen if you give people kind of the belief and the support at the very early days.
And I mean, we're talking about now the accelerator concept and what that is. And of course, you invest. Firstly, you're there to recognize the potential. And then sometimes you recognize the potential between 2 people and how they can potentially work together. And then you support them with a small amount of funding. You give them all the mentoring that they need along the way. And I think, any one of those steps you don't do and things can fall apart. But when you do all those steps right, this is the kind of success story that you can have. It's really, really exciting. So I can see how you love your job. It just screams from you. You're talking about, let's go talk about composition again. And you mentioned the female founders. Obviously, there's tons of stuff in the media, past year or two around female founders. And, there's clearly a genuine intention from venture capital, investors to invest in female founders. But of course, then you have to measure that up with what's available. What is your view on that, and how did you find your current founders? Because finding 3 or 4 that you want to put within that group of 11 couldn't have been easy.
Yeah, totally. So like you said, there's just not enough venture capital going into women founders. And for us, the Startmate journey started 7 or 8 years ago. Now our numbers are actually okay. They're way above the industry average. But it took us a long, long time to get there. And that's, I think, what a lot of people don't appreciate, because they just did not see that kind of history unfold. And it all started with our women fellowship. So 4 or 5 years ago in 2019, we essentially went on that mission of getting more women into startups. And it wasn't even at that. Actually, let me backtrack here a little bit. Most VCs think that in order to fix that pipeline of women getting funded, you have to fix it all the way at the end, which is let's just give women money, which is totally fair, absolutely. But the problem starts way, way earlier down the pipeline. It starts all the way from actually getting women into the industry, but even before that, to be fair, in schools and so on. So we actually started that with getting women into startups. The Women Fellowship now, it gets roughly 200 women into startups every single year. This is from corporates, from banking, from consulting, and they either start companies or they join companies. We've now had I think it's almost 1,000 women who went through the Women Fellowship over 5 years. What effect that has is that 600 or 700 of them already are now working in startups, which is huge compared to the Australian industry. But then also who do they tell? They tell all their friends and family, and they attract more women into their ecosystem and so on. It's a whole cycle there, which actually kicks off at the beginning of the funnel. So most VCs are actually not willing to go that extra step to start at the beginning, but they always start at the end, which then had the big knock-on effect, because essentially we really care about that issue. So now we started a whole initiative because we saw so many women get into startups. Well, the next problem that we had is, now we have actually a lot of women in startups. Let's actually create support groups for women, because they're still the minority. So we actually started the Ladymates Collective, which is now a membership for women in startups to support each other. And we also started the Ladymates Leadership membership, which is literally heads of and C-level women who support each other with peer advisory and executive coaching as well. Again, because you need those role models. The classic quote here is you can't be what you can't see. And it's exactly that whole pipeline of getting women in, creating support groups when you are in startups, but then also creating those role models and telling those stories. And that all then translates into us actually having women founders and being able to fund them as well. So it's a long, long journey.
It is a long journey, but it's really exciting that you've recognized that some time ago, and this now is well on track to deliver those companies that potentially can succeed and be funded. And I completely agree with you. It's well enough to fund people at the end, but actually you have to be ready for that whole journey. So it's great to hear that you guys are doing that very actively, which we see it on the market in any event. And you see the talent that's coming through from Ladymates, as well as the startups you fund that are female founded. That's fantastic. Now you were telling me about the other companies. So do you fund? You said software. And do you fund hardware companies?
Yep. So roughly 40% of our companies are in the hardware space as well now. Right. That shift kind of happened for us roughly in 2016. Yeah.
So with all these different style of businesses, different industries, what do you see? What are the trends out there? And I will talk about AI a bit, but what other trends do you see? What are the key trends you see in terms of startups, and who are the startups that are getting funded? Who are the startups that aren't getting funded? And where do you think that the needle will move from there?
Yeah. Well, historically, from like 2011 to 2016, 17, there was really mostly software funded, or like only mostly software startups were getting funded. That started shifting roughly around 2016, 2017. So one of those trends essentially is that hardware companies now actually more fundable. But what is actually the underlying reason behind that? It's mostly because you can actually, one is you can prototype way faster. 3D printing is actually, it makes it way more accessible. Two is it's actually cheaper because you can actually import materials way easier. And three is you can actually produce abroad way easier than you were able to 10 years ago. And all those three factors actually allowed hardware companies to iterate way faster. Because the classic thing of startups is actually don't overthink it, just get started, and the next iteration is going to be better, and you keep those feedback cycles going. So with hardware, the feedback cycles actually have massively improved. Yeah. So this is one of the trends which didn't exist roughly 10 years ago, and it's definitely on the rise.
In your accelerator, do you have capabilities like 3D printing for companies?
So we don't have that in the accelerator itself, because we help them mostly on like the sales, marketing, kind of fundraising side.
Right.
So we always describe Startmate as like we're a buffet and we don't spoon feed you. Right. So like we're not the type of accelerator who's gonna build the product for you, because at the end of the day you're gonna finish the program 12 weeks later and you actually need to stand on your own feet. It's actually negative if you're building something for the founder, because they actually need to be the best person to build it themselves. Yeah.
So within Startmate, you see companies really, really early, as you say, even when the products are not done. It's a moving target. You obviously want the right founder solving the right problem, and then that kind of inspires you to give them some money. But what would you say around bootstrapping businesses or startups? Like you're clearly giving them money very early on. But what's your view around that? Many of the VCs that you see out there, they're telling you, bootstrap as long as you can and then come to us.
Yeah, absolutely. As like venture capital is only one funding pathway, and it definitely isn't right for everybody. And even at Startmate, we tell people all the time of just like it actually isn't the right funding pathway for people. With venture capital itself is the best way I've had it explained to me actually is you are building a rocket and it literally is going to space. And only if you're building that rocket, venture funding is that fuel that you put into the rocket. Not everybody's building rockets, and not everybody should be building rockets. And you can absolutely build an incredible lifestyle business, a great company, to actually go there without venture capital funding. To your point also though, if you are building a venture, like a huge company, but you want to bootstrap at the beginning, absolutely. I always encourage people, just get it started as a side hustle, just get it going on the side, and then draw a line of like, if I get to X validation, to X customers, to X revenue, then I'm gonna go full time into it. But even then, like ideally, you actually fund it all through profit. Not all businesses are able to do that, unfortunately. But like, if you can, absolutely, you keep all of the equity, you could keep all of the control, and ideally, you actually don't have any other investors. Yeah.
So we were, skirting around AI. Let's talk about AI a little bit more. On a panel recently, we were talking about AI as a investable kind of asset class. And one of the panelists said that AI is not an area where you can bootstrap, that if you're seriously considering investing in an AI business, then it's, you playing with the big boys. Everybody's got really deep pockets. It moves really fast, so you really need to have the deep pockets. What is your view on that?
It's probably like a couple of different ways to look at that. Like if you're gonna build any AI in the huge model space and want to become the best model ever, I totally agree. It's like you've obviously got like some of the largest the largest companies in the world building those models, and it would be impossible to compete without the capital required. But then the exciting thing to me, at least, is that what it opened up, because it's just another tool in your toolbox. It's like a programming language to a developer. Like nobody cares that you build your program in JavaScript or in C++. AI is just another tool which actually gets you started as a founder way faster. What excites me about AI and why I think you can actually bootstrap is because we're still so early in the journey of AI, is pick a customer segment who is underserved or who isn't exposed to AI and just build something for the customer segment and make it so good that it becomes sticky. And they won't care that it's not built on the latest model or that you don't have the largest model or that you just plug into it as a third API kind of thing. What they care about is that you're actually solving the problem. So there's so many
and they don't even care if it's AI or not, so long
Absolutely,
as you're
yeah.
solving their problem.
It's like you don't care that your website was built on a certain programming language. As long as it solves my problem, I'm going to pay for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Your focus is in Australia, New Zealand only?
Yeah, that's right. So like all of our founders have to have an Aussie or Kiwi focus.
Why is that?
We believe that that we just have so many awesome resources here in Australia and New Zealand that we can actually compete on the world stage. Like I guess the recent topic is the Olympics. Is like Australia will win gold medals in the Olympics, and we believe that you can build incredible companies here. We have some awesome education, great people. Salaries are actually lower than in San Francisco, for example, for developers. And I mean, it literally has the most incredible lifestyle. Who wouldn't want to live in Australia and New Zealand?
So you think there's enough quality startups in Australia to invest in?
I believe so. It's definitely growing. I would still like it to keep growing further. And there's definitely bigger ecosystems than Australia and New Zealand as well.
So I want to switch the topic to sophisticated investors, and lots of discussion recently around who should be a sophisticated investor. The government's been talking about, and of course they seem to have put it on the shelf for now, but I don't think that topic will go away because frankly it's not realistic, the definition currently in my view, and it should definitely change. But what's your view around what should be the definition of a sophisticated investor?
Yeah. So for context, maybe for listeners as well, like in order to invest in venture capital, the Australian regulation is that you have to be a sophisticated investor, which is defined as having $2.5 million in net assets or having annual income of $250K in 2 consecutive years. That's the current definition if you want to invest in a venture capital fund. There are certain exceptions if you want to invest into startups, like a family and friends round, and there's like a 20 and 12 rule and so on.
And there's a crowdsource funding.
So there's other avenues as well. It's like what it mostly prevents you to do is essentially invest in venture capital itself. I mean, my personal view is that everybody should be responsible for the risk that they are taking. Right now, you can walk into a bar, and especially in Australia, you just put $100 or $1,000 onto pokies, and you're going to lose it all. And you were aware of the risk yourself, and you're allowed to do that. But the Australian government's actually preventing you to do that with venture capital. Not that it's quite the same as pokies, but the risk obviously is still high there. But yet we are restricting people from doing that and making the decision themselves. And my personal view is that essentially what the test does, and whether you increase or decrease that threshold, all it's really testing is, are you rich or do you have enough money to invest? Which is fair, like, to some degree of like, you need to have enough money that you have enough playing money to essentially like invest it into anything. But the way better definition, in my opinion, would be, do you understand the risk, right? Because that's what we're actually trying to assess here. So like an educated pathway, essentially. Like, I mean, at Startmate, we have a program called First Believers, which literally helps 100 to 150 angel investors who are starting out to actually understand the risks of investing. But it also exposes them to hundreds of startups. Before they even write the first check of $10,000, they actually get to see 100 companies and assess them. Are they good or bad companies? Why do I think so? And actually build the mindset. So it's an education platform to actually understand it before you actually start investing. Something like that is way better as like a qualifying factor of whether somebody should be allowed to invest. Because absolutely, like, people who have no idea about venture capital, just throwing money at like what they don't understand does not make sense. But where's the threshold of education?
Absolutely, and I think the other piece to it is disclosure. And I think a lot of the time you just don't see appropriate disclosure of an opportunity, and risk tolerance and understanding your risk tolerance. I think it does require some kind of education, and but I also don't know how the government could regulate what you put your money in and not. Rightfully so. So you raised the issue around the pokies. actually a lot of the time, if you don't have proper disclosure of an of an opportunity, it's pretty much like the pokers. You've got a 50-50 chance or less of doing something. So look, I think the interesting piece to me is disclosure and how that should potentially change in terms of these opportunities, so that people actually go into it with an informed and open eyes.
Yeah.
So I think I think those pieces are really really the key, and I don't know how the government can regulate those pieces.
Yeah. No, exactly right. And sometimes, to be fair, like you shouldn't be over-regulating it either. Like just let it play out and just put in what it's kind of required. So like with the education pathway, at least you know all the parties are rightly informed. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, another topic I want to switch over again to work-life balance. You seem to be on 24/7. I see you on LinkedIn, I see you on different platforms, I see you on WhatsApp. You seem to be doing everything all the time. How do you manage it, and what kind of tools or systems do you use to have some downtime and relax and switch off?
Yeah. Probably two things I can tell you here. Like one is my systems, and I'll come back to that in a second. And the other one is I don't love the term work-life boundary balance, because it kind of like with balance itself, it's kind of like the whole like back and forth, and it all like is fluid, and it's really hard to establish, am I like working or living, or like should you even distinguish the two? What I love for myself is actually the idea of work-life boundaries, where like I don't start work, for example, and this is my personal boundary, before 9 a.m. And that makes it really easy, because after work, it's super hard for me to switch off, because sometimes you just get a late meeting, get a late email, or you want to reply to something. And going to the gym for me at like 8 or 9 p.m. is like sometimes not even possible. Whereas if I actually set myself the boundary of like I don't start work before 9, actually that is a lot more in my control, because I told my whole team, hey, no meetings before 9 a.m. I don't reply to emails or Slacks before then as well. And I actually have time for myself, my wife, doing sports, and
So you're a morning exerciser.
I'm absolutely a morning exerciser.
And is that mostly running or other stuff as well?
I love beach volleyball. So I live in Coogee. So I play like 4 times a week. At 6 a.m. I'm there on the beach till 8 a.m. and at 9 a.m. I'm at work. Yeah.
So what's next for Startmate?
What's next for us is three things, or like the easiest way to explain this is probably three things. The easiest way to explain Startmate is what we started with is founders. We invest in 30 new founders every single year. We've invested in over 250 founders by now, and that's our core. What we then saw at Startmate is that so many of our founders started raised lots of money, and that problem they have is hiring. So we've got a whole operator side of things. So we help thousands of people now get into startups and startup jobs. And the third aspect of it is obviously the people giving those founders money, so they're investors. So what is next for Startmate? On all three of those lenses, we're essentially expanding Startmate. The first one is on the founder side. Founders, it's insanely hard to build a startup. You're essentially going against the world, going against incumbents. And my idea is that at every stage of building a startup, it's like running hurdles in the Olympics, where you have to jump over hurdles all the time. It's like I want to reduce those hurdles as much as possible across all of those hundreds and thousands of challenges that you have. So we are essentially building a whole pipeline of initiatives for founders. We are starting with Launch Club, which is our pre-accelerator, to get an idea validated. We then get it funded with a small bet, which is $25K. We then get you in an accelerator to get you the first customers and get you $120,000. We then actually get you into and keep supporting you for our continuity fund, so we can actually keep investing in your success afterwards. I'm just building a program called GrowthMate, where I'm going to help in very small groups, Series A and B founders, to actually support each other. So along the whole journey, I want to help founders. The second part is the operator side. Like what we're going really deep into is essentially getting more women into startups and supporting them, which is what I talked about with Ladymates in particular. But we're also starting to explore that on the engineering front. So we're just about to launch an engineering collective as well, because what all of our founders ask us all the time for is, I need engineering talent.
Right.
And the final part is first believers or our investors. We raise a new fund every 6 months, which is roughly $2 to $3 million. And we also have a continuity fund of $12 million. But our first believers are amazing. They're like angel investors who are starting out on the journey to writing checks. And we help them for like 3 or 4 months, and then they go off in the world and invest in startups. And the next phase of that one is most likely going to be some sort of membership and continuous place for investors to actually highlight deals, share deals, and actually like invest together, rather than it just being time limited to like a 3-month time horizon.
So these are the early pieces of funding a company, but obviously, so there's a couple of things. One is, how many companies fall out through that journey from your cohort each time? So what percentage actually make it through so that they're ready for that Series A or B or even seed? Sometimes depends on what kind of the journey is. So what is the rate of the fallout from your
Yeah,
cohorts?
for sure. So after Startmate, 50 to 60% of our companies raise between $1 to $4 million is usually the range, but we've also had complete outliers who like raise $20 million as well. Yeah.
So about 50% of them will make it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what happens to the other 50%?
Yeah, totally. Startups are insanely hard. So like if it doesn't work out, the beauty of Startmate is actually the community itself. So like the most magical things for me are the circle of life that you see within Startmate. Because once founders know each other so well, they've seen each other work, even if the company doesn't work out, pretty much like 8 out of 10 times, the founder gets hired into one of the other companies in the cohort, which is amazing because they actually get to build it with their friends essentially.
And I found that as well in that startup community. Now, I've run a listed company for 15 years, so it was a very different environment until a couple of years ago. But when I came in, back into the startup community after many years of break, I can see how important that community aspect is, the working together, sharing information, sharing skills and talent. I think that is absolutely critical because it's a really, really tough journey. So if you can help a mate, then it's a good thing.
Absolutely.
Because you'll probably be out there asking for help in the future at some point.
Yeah.
So very last topic before we move on to our random 5 is your Puddle Pod.
Yeah.
Tell me about that. How did that come about? How did you decide to launch it? And what kind of tools and capabilities can you learn when you go on site?
Yeah, totally. So Puddle Pod stands for Productivity Huddle Pod, and it came out of my personal motivation that I love being efficient. Like I hate wasting time on things, and I just love playing around with settings and just working things out. And I don't know, that was just something that I always was doing. So it started with whenever I saw somebody on the laptop and just doing something really inefficiently, I will look over the shoulder like, hey, you can actually do this faster with the shortcut. And
did they listen?
And they listened, and they even asked me for a whole 30-minute session. And then the whole 30-minute sessions turned into like whole 1-hour workshops in front of like dozens and hundreds of people. And then I even taught that in like actually in Switzerland in one of the universities as like a literal course. And at which stage I decided, hey, why don't I just productize that and make that into something that actually can impact like hundreds and thousands of people rather than just 10 people in a room? Which is when 4 years ago I started Puddle Pod. And essentially it's a 5-week productivity course. And it starts with, counterintuitively, it doesn't start necessarily with tips and tricks, which is what most people expect. But it actually starts with cleaning up what's already in your head and simplifying your life. Like we have so many tools already. So actually like make it simple. And then it starts with, well, even before, again, like tools and tricks, we actually go into, all right, what's the most important thing in life, which is family and friends. And then it's yourself with like sports and health. And then we actually go into inbox, calendar, to-do lists, and all the tips and tricks. So within 5 weeks, it's like a full cleanup of your life. And actually recently I've just expanded it into implementing a second course, which is AI in your day-to-day. So actually a friend of mine who's an AI expert teaches that. And we're just about to launch in 2 months actually, an AI in marketing course, as well as a B2B sales course as well. Yeah.
And you're doing all that, plus you've got a full-time job.
Yes, there's a couple of things going on.
You definitely need those tips, and you obviously need those tools so that it can help you get organized for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, random 5. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, so random 5, number 1. I'm picking the questions. We've got many. You saw some of them.
Yeah.
So where do you see yourself in 5 years' time?
I honestly, yeah, I mean, it's very much at Startmate, and when I think about Startmate in 5 years' time, I would love to be inspiring people throughout the entire funnel. Right now, we kind of do that to students and so on, but I would love to do that for high schools and primary schools and so on, like all the way at the beginning.
Okay, so you're going to stay in your current job, but you're just going to build it further. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, that's a great answer. So next one is, what is your favorite childhood memory? You were born in Vienna. How old were you when you moved?
I was 18 when I moved to the UK. Yeah.
Okay, so you've got a fair bit of childhood memories in Vienna.
I mean, actually, when I think about that question, it's a bit random, but essentially it was the drives from Vienna to Krakow in Poland. It was like a 7 or 8 hour drive back in the day, and it was just essentially my sister, I, and my parents, and it just felt like we were always just playing some kind of games or doing some kind of puzzles. And I still remember every single time, and this was the only time that we did that, we stopped at Macca's, and it was like that one treat that we had every 6 months. And we were going on holidays, and we were going to Poland for Christmas trip. Yeah. And
Macca's.
Yeah.
Well, that's not a great memory to relive. There's plenty of Macca's in Australia. Yeah. What would be the one advice you would give to startups or a startup founder who's listening today?
Yeah. It's always the same one, which is talk to customers. Always. Like, people overthink it, over-engineer, start building, start saying like, oh no, I can't do it. And they just never start at the step number 1, which is just like talk to a couple of people who you think are going to be your customers and learn from them. People always start at the other side, which is the building part. Because your customers, essentially, like, you're doing marketing and sales at the same time because you're talking to them already. And the other one, which is very crucial, you're finding out whether the problem that you're solving is truly the problem they have. People are just too scared to talk to others and approach people randomly. But like, that is the way to build a startup.
That is so true. You're always going back to solving a problem for someone. And then I think product market fit would be easier. Olympics are on. Are you watching them?
Actually, not too much, but I've definitely been exposed to a lot of Twitter chat.
Fair enough. What's your favorite Olympic sport to watch?
Well, I'm a beach volleyball player myself, so I absolutely loved it. But I was thinking about like what sport am I most impressed with, and I have to say walking, because they walk faster than I run. And I just can't believe that.
But they're not walking. They're not walking. Did you see the slow motion
it's amazing.
Of them? And when they're walking, the definition is at least one of your foot has to be on the ground, but it isn't. Yeah. Actually, when you're watching them and you slow-mo, both of their feet are off the ground. It should just be called slow running.
Yeah. Well,
I don't think I think it's not walking.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely not slow either.
That is true, especially my running speed. So who's going to win the medal table while we're at the Olympics? Oh. And is Australia going to stay number 4?
Well, I know you know who I'm going for, so definitely Australia.
Yes.
Yeah, I do believe Australia can win many gold medals on the world stage in the Olympics, but also in startups.
So I'm really wondering, I always ask this question about dinner parties, and I've got a very specific one that I've planned for you. I hope you don't mind if I ask you who would be the last guest to invite in a dinner for 6, but I'll give you the 4 guests, and you can also attend as well. So if you have Marie Curie, Chopin, Pope John Paul II, and Roman Polanski as 4 guests, and yourself, who would be the number 6 guest?
Yeah, wow. Okay, well, the connection is definitely Polish. And
would that have to be a Polish person?
well, honestly, like the person who I'm thinking about would be my aunt, who is Polish, and she's one of the sweetest people ever. And I know her face would absolutely drop with those people in the room, and I would want to make her day.
Sounds good. I do want to ask you one more question about the book.
Yeah.
There's so many. I mean, you're so much into productivity. You're so effective. We call you like the magic person who is everywhere because you just do so much, and I totally admire that. But tell me, do you have a book or a number of books that you'd recommend people? And may not have to do anything with productivity. It could be a novel. It could be anything.
Well, I read a lot. So like actually every book I read I summarize on my blog as well. So I think I'm up to book number summary 183 or something. I just did one yesterday. But my favorite book, which I always recommend to people, is The Courage to be Disliked. It's a really heavy book actually by a Japanese philosopher, and it's the whole idea to just do what you want to be doing rather than living up to other people's expectations. Because whose life are you actually living? Are you living your own life, or are you just living the expectation of somebody else? So excellent book. It does take quite a bit of time to read through.
So when you summarize books, you write book summaries. How long are these book summaries, and what do you put down?
Yeah. I read on the Kindle, so I highlight, and then there's an awesome extension called clippings.io, which just takes all of your highlights. So I just copy paste them into my book summary, provide a bit of commentary. And honestly, I do that mostly for myself, because how often do you read even a novel, like even, I don't know, like a Harry Potter book, and how much do you actually remember out of book number 3? Like you'd remember like 2 sentences kind of thing from it. Whereas, and my memory is terrible, so I always need to write everything down. But now whenever somebody asks me about the book, or I'm like, oh, I read this somewhere, I can actually go back to my own book summaries, which is like my productivity hack to essentially remember way more than I possibly could.
I just learned something, a productivity hack. I'm going to use that.
Yes.
Well, with that, Michael, it was an absolute pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for joining me today. And for those of you who were listening to this amazing conversation with Michael Batko and you enjoyed it, please follow us on your favorite podcast channel or go to our YouTube channel where there's more content for you to listen to. Thank you.